Daf Yomi, Tractate, Avodah Zarah, page 25. And starting from the bottom of 24b, just to start the new idea, Rav Ashi Amar, Rav Ashi said, Kaman karu parsal nida deshanta mehacha kiderach nashimli. The Gemara examines the etymology of another term coined by the Persians. Rav Ashi said, on what basis do the Persians call a menstruating woman dashtana? It is from here, a verse in which Rachel claims to be a menstruating woman. For the manner of women is upon me. Derech nashim li, and those letters form the word dashtana. Derech nashim li, dashtana. Kind of forms that word through that verse. It's in Genesis 31:35. The word dashtana is shortened form of the phrase derech nashim. Okay, now we move to 25a, top of the page. Vayidom hashemesh ve'areach amad ad yikom goy oivav halo hi kisva al sefer hayashar. My Sefer Yeshar, Amar B'chi Amar Amar Yochanan, Zeh Sefer Abraham Yitzchak V'Yakov, Shnikru Yesharim, Shneimar, Tamot Nafshi Mot Yesharim, which comes from the parsha we just read yesterday. Interesting. The Gemara cites a series of expositions with regard to what is called the book of Yeshar. The verse states that the sun stood still and the moon stayed until the nation had avenged themselves of their enemies. Is this not written in the book of Yeshar? Joshua 10:13. The Gemara asks, what is the book of Yeshar? Rabbi Bar Abba says that Rabbi Yochanan says this is Genesis, which is the book of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were called righteous, Yesharim. As it is stated, let me die the death of the righteous, Yesharim. Numbers 23:10. Okay. The Gemara asks, and where is it alluded to in Genesis that the sun would stand still for Joshua? The verse states, in reference to Ephraim, who was Joshua's ancestor, and his seed shall become a multitude of nations. Genesis 48:19. The Gemara asks, when will he become a multitude of nations? He became a multitude of nations at the time when the sun stood in place for Joshua. As it is written, and the sun stayed in the midst of heaven and hastened not to go down for an entire day. Joshua 10:13. I don't see how this proves that he became a multitude of nations at that moment, other than they just wanted to say that, but I don't see how it's proven from that. But in any case, let's continue. The Gemara inquires at how much time elapsed before the sun finally set. Amar Yehoshua ben Levi, Esrim be'arba sha'im. Azal sheit v'kam sheit, Azal sheit v'kam sheit, Kula milta kayom tamim. How much time elapsed before the sun finally set? Yehoshua ben Levi said it took 24 hours. It traveled across the sky for 6 hours and stood still for 6 hours. And again traveled 6 hours and stood still for 6 hours. So that the entire matter lasted the duration of a day. The sun traveled across the sky. Maybe it appeared to travel across the sky. Is that what you meant to say? Because it stood still, it means it didn't stand still, and the earth stood still. Because if the earth is revolving around the sun, then the sun doesn't stand still. So why is the Talmud saying here that the sun traveled across the sky and then it stood still? Unless he's saying that it appeared to stand still, really the earth stood still. Okay. So the entire matter lasted the duration of the entire day. Okay. Rabbi Elazar Amar, Shloshim v'sheit, Azal sheit v'kam trisar, Azal sheit v'kam trisar, Amidato kayam tamim, Rabbi Shmuel barachman yamar, 48, Azal sheit v'kam trisar, Azal sheit v'kam 24, שנאמר ולא אץ לבו כיום תמים. בכלל, דמיקר עליו כיום תמים. Rabbi Elazar said it lasted 36 hours. The sun traveled for 6 hours and stood for 12 hours, and again traveled for 36 hours and stood for 12 hours, so that the accumulated time of its suspension was that of an entire day. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said 48 hours elapsed before it set. It traveled 6 hours and stood for 12 hours. He says it traveled. The sun's not traveling. It just kind of bothers me, that language. It traveled. Azal, it went. Maybe he just means it looked like it went. It traveled 6 hours and stood for 12 hours, and then traveled 6 hours and stood for 24 hours, as it is stated in the sun state in the midst of heaven. And then, and hastened not to go down for an entire day. By inference, it can be understood that initially it was not suspended for an entire day. Rather, at first it stood for 12 hours and was later suspended for an entire day. בתוספתא פליגי, רבי יהושע בן לוי אמר, 24, אזל שית וקם תריסר, אזל שית וקם תריסר, עמידתו כיום תמים. רבי אלעזר אמר, 36, אזל שית וקם תריסר, אזל שית וקם 24, ולא אץ לבוא כיום תמים. There are those who say that these sages do not disagree over how much time had elapsed before the sun set. Rather, they disagree with regard to the additional time by which the day was extended. Rabbi Yehoshua ben Levi said 24 hours were added to the day because the sun traveled 6 hours and stood 12 hours. And again, traveled 6 hours and stood for another 12 hours, which meant that its standing time lasted for an entire day. Rabbi Elazar said that 36 hours were added. It traveled 6 hours and stood for 12 hours, and then traveled 6 hours and stood for 24 more hours. It is with regard to the second suspension that the verse states, and hasten not to go down for an entire day. Continue. Where were we? Rishon Rahmani says, 48, אזל שית וקם 24 ואזל שית וקם 24 מה כי שמעתו לביאתו מה ביאתו כיום תמים אף עמידתו כיום תמים. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said the time the sun stood in place was 48 hours in total. The sun traveled 6 hours and stood 24 hours, and then traveled another 6 hours and stood for another 24 hours. His reasoning is that the verse juxtaposes the sun's suspension to its motion. Just as the sun is in motion for an entire day, so too its suspension was for an entire day. Tana, כשם שעמדה לו חמה ליהושע, כך עמדה לו חמה למשה ולנקדימון בן גוריון. יהושע קרא נקדימון בן גוריון גמרא, למשה מנהלן, עתיה אכל, כתיב אכל תת פחתך, וכתיב אתה ויהושע אכל גדלך. It is taught, just as the sun stood still for Joshua, so too the sun stood still for Moses and for Nakdimon ben Gurion. It is known that it stood still for Joshua from a verse, and it is known that it stood still for Nakdimon Ben Gurion by tradition. From where do we derive that it stood still for Moses as well? The Gemara answers it is derived by means of a verbal analogy between the terms I will begin and I will begin. The Gemara elaborates, it is written here with regard to Moses, I will begin to deliver the dread of you and the fear of you upon the people, Deuteronomy 2:25. And it is written there with regard to Joshua, I will begin to magnify you. Joshua 3 verse 7. Rabbi Yochanan Amar Atya Tet Ktivacha Achel Tet Pachdecha Uchetiv Yehoshua B'yom Tet Hashem Et HaEmori. And Rabbi Yochanan says it is derived from a verbal analogy between the words delivered and delivered. It is written here with regard to Moses, I will begin to deliver the dread of you, and it is written there with regard to Joshua, in the day when the Lord delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. Joshua 10:12. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani Amar Migufe Dikra Shma Taleh Asher Yishme'un Shimacha V'Ragzu V'Chalu Mipanecha Imatai Ragzu V'Chalu Mipanecha Isha She'amda Lo Chama LeMoshe. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani said that there is no need for a verbal analogy, as you can learn this idea from the verse itself. This day will I begin to deliver the dread of you and the fear of you upon the peoples that are under the whole heaven, who, when they hear the report of you, shall tremble and be in anguish because of you. Deuteronomy 2:25. When was the fulfillment of the prophecy that all the nations shall tremble and be in anguish because of you? It was at the time when the sun stood still for Moses. Meisvei v'lo haya kayom ahu fanav v'acharav ibo yisema sha'otu dila havo nafishan kulehai ibaitem avnei bara lo havo dichtiv v'hi benasam mipnei bnei Yisrael hem b'morad bet choron Hashem yishlich alehem avalim gidolot min hashemayim ad azeka veyamutu. The Gemara raises an objection after the sun stood still. The verse states, and there was no day like that before or after it. Joshua 10:14. If there was no day comparable to it, how can it be asserted that the sun stood still for Moses as well? The Gemara answers, if you wish, say, that the number of hours the sun stood still for Moses was not as many as in the case of Joshua. And if you wish, say instead, when the sun stood still for Moses, there were no hailstones, whereas in the case of Joshua there were hailstones, as it is written, and it came to pass, as they fled from before the children of Israel, while they were in the descent of Beth Horon, that the Lord cast down great stones from heaven upon them to Azekah, and they died. Joshua 10:11. Ketiv Vayomer lelamed bnei Yehuda kashet hine ketuva al Sefer HaYashar. My Sefer HaYashar Amr Bechia Barabba Amr Yochanan זה ספר אברהם, יצחק ויעקב, שנקראו ישרים. דכתיב בהו, תמות נפשי, מות ישרים, ותהי אחריתי כמוהו. The Gemara cites another exposition with regard to the book of Yeshar. It is written and said to teach the sons of Judah the bow. Behold, it is written in the book of Yeshar, 2 Samuel 1:18. The Gemara again asks, what is the book of Yeshar? Rechia bar Abba says, that Yochanan says, this is the book of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, who were called righteous, Yesharim. As it is written with regard to them, let me die the death of the righteous, and then my end be like his. Numbers 23:10. V'heichad ramizo Yehuda ata yibducha hecha yadcha v'oref oivecha ve'ezo hi milchama shetzricha yad keneged oref havyomer zekeshet. The Gemara further analyzes the verse in Samuel, and where is it alluded to in Genesis that Judah must be taught to use the bow? The verse states, Judah, your brothers shall praise you, your hand shall be on the nape of your enemies. Genesis 49:8. The Gemara explains what is the form of warfare that requires one's hand to be held opposite the nape. You must say, and this is referring to the use of a bow. This is referring of the verse in Samuel. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Zeh Sofer Mishneh Torah, Amai Karula Le Sefer Yashar, Yichsiv Yasisa Yashar Yatov El Yashem, V'eichad ramizo Yadov Rav Lo, Ve'ezo hi milchama shetzricha shtei yadayim, hayomer zekeshet. Okay. The Gemara cites a different interpretation. Rabbi Elazar says that the book of Yashar is the book of Deuteronomy. And why did they call it the book of Yashar? As it is written, and you shall do that which is right, Yashar, and good in the sight of the Lord. Deuteronomy 6:18. And where is it alluded to in Deuteronomy that Judah must be taught to use the bow? The verse states, and this for Judah, as he said, hear, Lord, the voice of Judah, and bring him unto his people. His hands shall contend for him. Deuteronomy 33:7. What is the form of warfare that requires the use of two hands? You must say that this is referring to the use of a bow. This is a reference of the verse in Samuel. V'shmo bar Nachman yamar zeh Sefer Shoftim. V'mai karo le Sefer Yashar. Tichtiv בימים ההם אין מלך בישראל איש הישר בעיניו יעשה. והיכד רמיזה למען דעת תוירוס בני ישראל ללמדה מלחמה, ואיזו היא מלחמה שצריכה לימוד, הווי אומר זו קשת. The Gemara provides yet another explanation. Rabbi Shmuel Bar Nachmani says that the book of Yashar is the book of Judges. And why did they call it the book of Yashar? As is written in these days. In those days, there was no king in Israel. Every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Yashar. Be'inav. Yaseh. Judges 17:6. And where is it alluded to in Judges that Judah must be taught to use the bow? The verse states, only that the generations of the children of Israel might know to teach them war. Judges 3:2. What is the form of warfare that requires teaching? You must say that this is referring to the use of a bow. This is the reference to the verse in Samuel. Minalan ביהודה כתיב, תכתיב מי יעלה לנו בתחילה אל הכנעני, להילחם בו, ויאמר השם יהודה יעלה. The Gemara asks, and from where do we derive, Judges 3:2 is written in reference to Judah. We derive it as it is written, the children of Israel asked the Lord, saying, who shall go up for us first against the Canaanites to fight against them? And the Lord said, Judah shall go up first. Judges 1:1-2. וירם הטבח את השור, והעליה ישים לפני שאול. מאי והעליה? רבי יוחנן אמר, שוק ועליה. מאי והעליה? דמס מסמכה שוק לעליה. The Gemara cites another dispute between the same Amoraim. The verse states And the cook took up the thigh, and that which was upon it, and set it before Saul, 1 Samuel 9:24. To what does the term "and that which was upon it" refer? Rabbi Yochanan says it refers to the thigh and the tail. The Gemara asks, what is the reason that the tail is referred to as "and that which was upon it"? The reason is that the thigh supports the tail as it rests upon it. Rabbi Elazar Omer, Shok v'chazeh, mai v'he'alea, dimachet le, v'chazeh ilaveh tishok, כי באה עולפה ומנפלה, ורבי שמואל בר נחמני אמר, שוק ושופי, מאי בהליה, שופי ילווה דשוק כאה. And Rabbi Elazar says the first refers to the thigh and the breast. What is the reason that the breast is referred to as "and that which was upon it"? The reason is that one places the breast upon the thigh when it requires sacrificial waving, and waves it. Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachmani says the verse refers to the thigh and the cap. Shofi, meaning the very top part of the leg. What is the reason that the cap is referred to as "and that which was upon it" is because it refers to the cap that stands above the thigh. Okay. לא תתייחד אישה עמהם, ומה יעסקינן? אילמה בך דכבתה. כי בישראל נשארי והתנא לא יתייחד איש אחד עם שתי נשים. The Mishnah teaches that a woman may not seclude herself with Gentiles. The Gemara asks, what are we dealing with? If we say that we are dealing with a woman who secludes herself with one Gentile, is this permitted in the corresponding situation involving a Jew? But didn't we learn in the Mishnah in condition 80b, one man may not seclude himself even with two women? It is certainly forbidden for one man to be secluded with one woman. And now turning to 25b, top of the page, with the words Ela Betlata. Ela Betlata, Dihvate Gavan Yisrael, Gurutzim, Mi Shari Yotanan, Avad Isha Achat Minichet Im Shtei Anashim, Yamar Rav Yehuda Amar Shmuel, לא שאנו אלא בכשרים, אבל בפרוצים אפילו שר נמי לו. מה זה היה בחסייה שר ומיתה? Rather, the Mishnah is referring to a case in which a woman secludes herself with three Gentiles. The Gemara asks, is this permitted in the corresponding situation involving Jews steeped in sexual immorality? But didn't we learn in a Mishnah, in Kedushin 80b, but one woman may be secluded with two men? And Rav Yehuda says, and Shmuel says, they taught this halacha only with regard to men of fit morals. But with regard to those steeped in sexual immorality, she may not be secluded even with 10 men. There was an incident where 10 men carried a woman out of the city on a bier, and as though she were dead, and they engaged in intercourse with her. Was she dead or not? I don't see how that's connected to the story. This has nothing to do with it. It's not one woman secluding. This is just one man, 10 people carrying a woman on a thing. I don't get that. Lo tzricha b'ishta imo goy. Ein ishta mishmalto, aval Yisrael ishta mishmalto. The Gemara answers no. The ruling of the Mishnah here is necessary in the case where the Gentile's wife is with him. The difference between the two rulings is that in the case of a Gentile, it is assumed that his wife does not guard him against sinning with another. But with regard to a Jew, his wife does guard against sinning with another. חשובה עסקינן מירתתי מינה Rabbi Amar Isha Kle Zaina Aleha. Okay, just one moment, please. The Mishnah teaches that a woman may not seclude herself with a Gentile due to the concern that they might engage in illicit sexual relations. The Gemara challenges them, let us derive that a woman may not seclude herself with a Gentile due to the concern about bloodshed. The Gemara cites two responses. Rabbi Yirmiyah says, we're dealing with a distinguished woman whom Gentiles will not kill, as they are fearful of her status. Nevertheless, there's a concern with regard to illicit sexual relations. Ravidi Baravin says a woman carries her weapons upon her. In other words, there is no need to be concerned that a woman might be killed by Gentiles. Rather, the very fact that she is a woman protects her, as they would most likely violate her and not kill her. Okay. My binayu, ika binayu, isha chashuva ben anashim, v'sheinu chashuva ben anashim. The Gemara asks, what is the practical difference between these two answers? The Gemara answers, the difference between them is with regard to a woman who is distinguished among men due to her political position, but is not distinguished among the women, meaning she's unattractive. According to Rabbi Yirmiyah, there is no concern that she will be killed, as she is distinguished, nor is there a concern that they will engage in relations because she's unattractive. Therefore, it would be permitted for her to seclude herself with them. By contrast, Rabbi Ravin stated his explanation in general terms. He evidently holds that the concern of illicit sexual relations always applies regardless of the woman's appearance. Okay? Tanya Gerate David Ravin Aisha Afal Pi Shahashalom Ima Lo Tityached Imahen Mipnei Shechashudin Ala Arayot. The Gemara notes that it is taught in Braita in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Ravin with regard to a woman, even though her protection accompanies her, meaning she is not in danger of being killed, she may not seclude herself with Gentiles because they are suspected of engaging in forbidden sexual relations. Lo yitiyached adam imahen tanur benan Israel שנזדמן לו גוי בדרך. טוב לו לימינו, רבי ישמעאל בנו, שרבי יוחנן בן ברוקה אומר, בסייף תופלו לימינו, במקל תופלו לשמאלו. The Mishnah further teaches that a person may not seclude himself with Gentiles because they are suspected of bloodshed. The sages taught a Jew who encounters a Gentile on the road and continues his travels with him should position the Gentile to his right so that the Jew's dominant hand is closest to the Gentile, which will enable him to defend himself against a potential attack. Rabbi Yishmael, son of Rabbi Yochanan ben Broga, says, if the Gentile is armed with a sword, the Jew positions him to his right because the blade is usually carried on one's left side. But if the Gentile is armed with a stick, the Jew should steer him to his left, as the stick is usually carried on one's right hand. By walking on the same side as the Gentile's weapon, the Jew can best prevent him from drawing it. Okay. היו אויל ממעלה או יורד מרידו לא יהיה ישראל למטה וגוי למעלה אלא ישראל למטה וגוי למטה ואל ישוח לפניו שמא ירוץ את גולגולתו. The Gemara continues, if the Jew and Gentile were ascending an incline or descending a decline, the Jew should not be positioned below while the Gentile is above, so that the Gentile will not have the advantage of height if he decides to attack. Rather, the Jew should be located above while the Gentile is below, and the Jew should not bend down before him lest the Gentile break his skull. Wow, a lot of Jew and Gentile fear back then. I guess maybe now as well, but anyway. שאלו היכן הולך יעקב לא עשה דרך כדרך שעשה יעקב אבינו לעשב הרשע כדכתיב עד אשר אבוא אל אדוני שעירה. Furthermore, if the Gentile asks him, where is he going? The Jew should extend the journey when relating his destination to him, meaning he should claim that he is traveling to a place beyond his actual destination, in the manner that Jacob our father did to the wicked Esau. As it is written that Jacob said to Esau, let my Lord pass over before his servant, and I will journey on gently, according to the place of the cattle that are before me, and according to the pace of the children, until I come to my Lord unto Seir. Genesis 34:14, and as I was saying, 33:14. Today in the P89 it is box 14. So we had 14 in the Daf, so that's the connection today. Receive 14 is also 17, and we're going to see the next verse is going to be Genesis 33:17. Yeah. Uchesiv Yaakov nasa Sukkota. Uchetiv Yaakov nasa Sukkota. The more continues, and is written subsequently, and Jacob journeyed to Sukkoth and built himself a house. Genesis 33:17. This box 14 is the 17th day of the month on the P89 calendar. Very nice. Rather than meeting Esau and Seir, Jacob traveled to the nearer location in Sukkot, telling a Gentile that one is traveling to a farther destination might cause a Gentile to defer his attack to the assumption that he has a longer period of time to plan and to execute it. As a result of the delay, the Jew has a better chance of reaching his true destination safely. And this is what someone was telling me yesterday. Maise B'Talmidav Rabbi Akiva. So this story was told to me by somebody on this box, 614, on 6th to 16th of Tammuz. This story was told. It's correlated perfectly. Okay, Maise B'Talmidav Rabbi Akiva Shehoy Roichin L'Chaziv. פגעו בהן ליסטים אמרו להן אתם הולכים אמרו להן לעכו כיוון שהגיע לחזיב פירושו אמרו להן תלמידי מי אתם אמרו להן תלמידי רבי עקיבא אמרו להן אשרי רבי עקיבא ותלמידיו שלא פגע בהן אדם רע מעולם. The Gemara illustrates this idea through a relevant story. An incident occurred involving several students of Rabbi Akiva who were traveling to Chaziv. Along the way, bandits encountered them and said to them, "Where are you going?" Rabbi Akiva's students said to them, "To Akko." Once they reached Chaziv, Rabbi Akiva's students separated from the bandits. If they were armed bandits, why didn't they just attack them right away? Anyway, at this point, the bandits said to them, "Whose students are you?" The students said to the bandits, "We are students of Rabbi Akiva." The bandits said to them, "Fortunate are Rabbi Akiva and his students, as they were never harmed by an evil person." The bandits were impressed with the wisdom that the students demonstrated in evading harm. Rav Menashe Haviazal, the Gemara relates another incident. Rav Menashe was traveling